So the next thing we're going to look at is cleaning up rows and columns that are scattered throughout your data set. Sometimes there'll be data sets that are combined together and you have to delete extra rows. Sometimes blank rows just pop up. It could be an error. Any number of reasons why there could be blank rows and columns scattered throughout. So we'll tackle that now. So here we are in Excel. I want to remind you about a topic we talked about in a previous video, and that is Excel's ability to recognize the data set that you want to reference. So if you remember, there was an example where I had an extra column and Excel didn't know what data you're trying to make a pivot table from. If I click inside this data set and I click Insert Pivot Table, it's only going to select this data up here because there's no other data touching that block. And I can change this range and extend it. But for the most part, we want to set up our data so that on one click, Excel knows exactly the data set we're talking about. Likewise, when I add even a space or a single character in all of these gaps, watch what happens. Excel now thinks this entire data set is all connected because there's no row or column that's not touching another row or column. And it thinks everything here is together. When we can obviously see there's wayward data, blank rows, and things we just don't need in this data set. So we're going to go ahead and clean those up. Get out of this, and I'll delete these. So I'm going to do a little reminder of how to delete rows and columns using keyboard shortcuts. For rows, it's AltHDR. So we'll do that twice, and then AltHDC for columns. Now that's easy enough, but what if you had, say, 25 rows that are scattered throughout? It would not be very fun to go through one by one and delete each of those, even if you had keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to show you a little trick. If I click any column in my data set and I click Alt-H-F-D-S, that brings up the Go to Special box. And there are a variety of special things that we can select in Excel, but in our case, we want to select all of the blanks. In this case, they're blank rows. So I simultaneously have two blank rows selected. And knowing what we know about deleting blank rows, the same rules apply. If I type Alt-HDR, both rows are gone. So that would be true if I had 20 or 2,000 blank rows, all at once gone. We also have this blank column, so I can do Alt-HDC to delete that. Now I want to discuss another common issue that comes up when you're combining data from multiple sources into a database or a data table. And that is, each data source might have their own headers. If I had this penne pasta video, or the data for it, somewhere else, and I combined it with this how to create it from scratch video, I have another row of headers. And we know Alt-HDR can delete a row, but what if you have hundreds of CSV files or data tables that have been combined, all of which have their own headers that you have to delete in order to get to one unified data set? Well, there's a way. We're going to go into filtering and things like that a little bit more in depth later, but I want to show you this trick. If I type Alt-A-T, that brings up my filters on the top of this data table. And then if I click day, you'll notice that I have all the months in 2021 selected, but I also have a stray kind of row that is just day. And these are two headers that have snuck into this data set. And if I'm summarizing data, I don't need multiple header rows. So in order to delete those, all I do is simply select both rows and type AltHDR the same way I've deleted rows before. And that will not delete everything in between those two rows. If I type Alt-AT, I'll get out of that. You can see that it simply deleted the header row that was selected. Everything else is still intact. So that's a very easy way if you have multiple rows that are hidden in a larger data set that all have to be deleted at once.